Subscribe to the channel. Thanks. r/AskReddit. Soldiers who have been held captive / were war prisoners by the enemy. What did you have to go through? The summer of 1943 was just ending, and I was a young pilot in the US Air Force, freshly joined and being scared out of my mind. Still, duty called and I couldn't ignore its call. I felt scared indeed, but also proud I was serving my country and had such a strong unit. In my heart I knew I had chosen right, no matter the outcome, but my mind kept telling me to run the other way and I hadn't even left the country yet. But time came, and I said goodbye to everyone, making sure I was leaving with peace of mind at least regarding this aspect of it. I still cannot believe myself for saying this, but, surprisingly, the first 2 months were actually a bit enjoyable. We had the same mission every few days, to spy over the enemy front, and see if anything changes, or if they gained ground by any chance. This routine was roughly done in 1 hour. One Tuesday me and my whole crew were asked to do an extra mission, nothing drastically different, but a bit more dangerous. We had to risk it. We were getting intel that the Japanese were planning to make a move and had to make sure. So, we flew and managed to get confirmation back to the base, all done smoothly and without sight of any danger. As we were planning to head back though, all the control tables started to light up like a Christmas tree. We had a sudden technical difficulty with one of the engines causing it to heat up pretty rapidly. We had no other choice but to eject. After trying to take every measure we could think of, we thankfully ejected while we were still over ground, as I don't think I'd be alive if we had reached the ocean. The Japanese jungle was rich and wet, excessively wild, and I started immediately panicking once I reached the ground. Although we were trained for these situations, there is no simulation for the terror that sets in, the paranoia and despair. I managed to make my way to a friend of mine that didn't manage to land smoothly and hurt his leg. But by the time I got to him, the sun was already setting, and we couldn't find shelter in time, nor move safely through the thick jungle. We were trapped in one place in the middle of nowhere. We obviously couldn't sleep from the paranoia, and we were right to feel it as by morning we were captured by the Japanese, and could not defend ourselves in any way. We were taken to their base, more like dragged, and were immediately valued as intelligence sources, and as soon as we refused to give them information, our torture began. They began by exhausting us. We were made to run daily, got just enough food to keep us alive, and got interrogated daily at random hours. We didn't have the privilege of sleeping for what I think to be about 7 days. They would check constantly, and if they saw any sign of sleep they would throw cold water over us. Our cells were next to each other, but we regretted right away for trying to communicate in any way. They made sure of it. When they saw we wouldn't break, after the first weeks, Phase 2 came. We changed cells to other ones, big enough just for a standing person to fit, and locked there 23 hours a day. We couldn't physically sit down, and were left in the darkness. I was able to keep my mind sane with just a pinch of luck. I had a sight hole near the lower side of the door, and if I tried just hard enough, I could see outside. My friend was not so lucky. I could often hear his mad screams, and shortly after that I would hear his moans of pain. I, on the other hand, was silent. Silence became my deity and my strength. I did not dare to speak, not even when they finally brought me food. It was just me, and the silence and the jungle noises, and that, somehow, gave me hope for a life outside of those 4 walls, truly alive and good. I swore to myself to speak, only when I would get it back, and if not to remain silent to my grave. Days were long and the nights longer, but I didn't mind them. The interrogations kept on going, but I remained silent. I refused to think about my family, and managed to get that to a minimum. I knew I would lose my mind, and lose all hope, if I thought about them, and the fact that they thought I was dead. I spent my whole winter like this, with the silence being my only source of warmth and calm, but almost always accompanied by the heavy sound of rain, that in some days I thought would never end. Now that I think about it, I meditated my way through that entire winter, and to this day I still don't know how I managed. I don't remember when my friend died. I just know he died at some point when I stopped hearing his screams. After that I got taken out and felt surprisingly anxious having that much space around me at all time. I was transferred to a much bigger one that even had a bed and toilet. The interrogations continued, but less harsh and less often. and in a matter of weeks, I was given a job inside the base to clean the toilets. It was horrific, but at least I had something to keep me busy. And then spring came. One day, as I was taking a bucket from the toilets to dump outside, I saw 3 planes just like the one I was piloting flying towards me. I knew. And with the realization of what I kept praying to silence to bring, victory, my feet stopped working, and I could finally scream my way up to the clouds and thank silence for making it happen. I cried like never before as I watched the American planes landing, and kept screaming, until I could feel no other pain other than my throat. I was reborn, just like my voice, my spirit, and my hope. Finally, the alive and good world outside was something I let myself think about, and I couldn't wait to get home. Hell, I can still remember it like it was yesterday. We were advancing through the Vietnamese jungle with care. The vegetation was so thick, our weapons really heavy, and the humidity felt like it will kill us before the enemy gets a chance. We were fighting for freedom and politics, of course, like all other soldiers do. Or so we were being told anyway. Most of us forgot to ask any questions. All they cared about was their loved ones. We hated that jungle. Our mission was to scout a location. After we have received intel from HQ about the enemy's hiding ammunition there. We were the best snipers in the team. When we went to war with our magnifying scopes on our rifles, the war turns into a hunt, rather than being simple killing. However, this time we were the ones being hunted. This was uncharted territory, and all we had was ourselves, and a map with locations, marked by one of the enemy prisoners we were holding captive. For all we know, those might be traps, but we had to take a chance, because a huge cargo of napalm was stolen from us, and this might be used against our troops any moment. In war it's mostly about numbers. If you can send in 3 men to save hundreds of others, then the decision makes chance. We were soldiers, we wouldn't argue with the orders anyway. So, we went in, delving further and further into the jungle. Before we know, we were caught under an ambush while we were trying to cross a river. They had us from all sides and we simply froze. But nobody was shooting. In that moment we knew that a fate worse than death was upon. We were to be taken prisoners. You know, you would always hear the stories around the fire before we went to sleep. A so and so got caught by so and so, and they did this and that to him. It made us hate this war even more. Now we were so and so, ready for this and that. The worst issue with those type of situations is that they never go fast. They tend to enjoy every moment and make it last, using you in the process if they can. You are at their disposal. We were taken and tied with a tight rope around our hands. We couldn't understand of what they were saying, but they couldn't understand us either. My comrade approached me and whispered to go for the knife in his boot. I told him it was too dangerous, but he insisted, saying that we will never get out of this otherwise. One of the enemies took notice and separated us. We were then placed in 3 separate dark rooms. Thick walls and cold concrete. So silent you could hear your blood flowing. For some, it can be scary to be alone with themselves. Their aim was not necessarily to acquire military information. It was mostly for breaking our spirits, both individually and as a group. And they started with prolonged solitary confinement. After some time, you lose the notion of time. You get hungry, thirsty, and you become dizzy. What felt like days later, somebody in a suit entered in my cell accompanied by 2 enemy soldiers with their guns. They looked intimidating, and I felt weak. The man in the suit proceeded to speak in a bad English, but I could somehow understand him. You need to give message, he said. Come give message or gun, he continued saying in a bad English. I knew what they wanted, war propaganda. They made me read a statement that criticized the US for their actions of war in Vietnam. Proudness was not one of the feelings I had in that moment, but I did what should have been done. War was war and I wasn't proud of it anyway. After I had read the speech they gave me on a piece of paper, I was taken back to my cell. Before the door locked behind me, leaving me in darkness, the man in the suit told me, after a week, again. I thought to myself that I won't last another week in those conditions. The door closed, and I fell to the ground, touching the cold concrete with my cheek. I instantly dived into a deep sleep. Moments later, I heard bangs, shots fired and screams. The cavalry was here. Home felt close. My brothers broke down the cell door and took me outside. The sun felt like it was burning my eyes, and for a few minutes I couldn't see anything. My knees were shaking at every step from the lack of nutrition, and 2 comrades helped me walk to the chopper. I asked them about the other 2. My fellow soldier nodded his head from left to right. They were too proud of being an American, sir, he told me. They refused to give out their speech, so they took action to show an example. I'm sorry, sir, he paused. You did the right thing. This whole thing worth isn't fighting for anyway. You are going home now, sir. The war for you is over. I was embarking onto the plane that would take mine right in the wolf's mouth. It was 1940, and I was enrolling to serve and defend the USA. Not because I wanted it, but because my older brother, Josh, was doing it, and I couldn't stand to leave him fighting alone. We got into the same unit, thankfully. I was anxious, hadn't slept well, since I found out the day of embarking and starting to question my decision. But it was already done. The plane took off, and we were headed off to Pearl Harbor, and I was going to serve on the USS Arizona, along with my entire unit. The flight went on smoothly, and we had less than an hour until we reached our destination when the plane I was in received a big hit, and throwing everyone and everything on board from here to there. Total panic. I didn't understand what was happening. I just realized it wasn't good at all. The plane was almost spinning, and the back of it started catching fire, filling it with thick, dense smoke. I remained frozen for what seemed like eternity, until my brother grabbed my hand to wake me up, and then handed me a parachute. I quickly put it on, and this was the last thing I remember, before I was already in the water and bits and pieces of the plane were all around me. The frozen water woke me up even more, and I started to desperately look around for Josh. We hadn't even been in a real fight. I kept thinking angrily, and I knew I'd rather not make it further without him. I wasn't majorly hurt, so I started swimming around until I saw an orange something raising from the water. It took me a few seconds to realize it was a raft. I wasn't really processing well what was happening, but I started swimming for it like I never did before, only I got interrupted by a scream. Josh. I quickly started swimming towards him and helped him untwine from his parachute that immobilized him. Then we hugged, crying of joy we are alive. The last thing we managed to do before a Japanese ship found us all. We were taken somewhere near Osaka and were told from the beginning we are war prisoners, and if we don't cooperate, we would be killed instantly. Don't tell them we are brothers, were the last words I managed to say to Josh before being separated. We stayed in a prisoner camp, alongside at least a couple of hundred others. The interrogations begun, followed by torture, and then more interrogations, and the cycle kept on going. I was beaten almost daily and afterwards taken into an obscure and filthy room, with a strong light on my face, dehydrated and hungry, being asked the same question over and over again. Are you giving up or not? They were looking for military intelligence, and were not happy for not receiving it. But I did not break, and I prayed anytime I got the chance, sometimes even during the beatings, that Josh wouldn't either. I knew that, if we started talking, they will use us up, and then kill us. They seemed to have tried everything. Chinese water torture, starvation, sleep deprivation, isolation, but I kept yelling each time I would hear that stupid question, a louder and angrier no. So, after a while, they tamed down my treatment, and I got put on the weekly rotation for the jobs inside the camp, which helped me discover that Josh was alive as well, but I couldn't see him more often than what my rotation permitted, let alone speak to him. I don't know why or how, but I stayed alive until the war was over. I'll never forget that day, finally breaking free from the barracks, finally breathing fresh air as a free man. However, when I looked around for Josh, he was nowhere to be seen. I started panicking, asking everybody around for him. Only the ones that stayed with him in the barracks said he died 2 nights before, that he caught a virus during his last week of work, and it took him down. I was told his last words were, I didn't tell them we are brothers, but you have to stay alive and do it. My soul shattered, and if it wasn't for his last words, I don't think I would have made it home either. But I owed it to Josh, just like I also owed all my previous life to him, and my new mission was to tell the world that he is my brother still, and I wouldn't be alive if he hadn't handed me that parachute. Subscribe. Thanks for watching UpGoat Reddit. Try like and subscribe button if it still works.